All right, so today's video is a big one. It's going to be my ultimate guide to growing your arms. This is something that a lot of lifters struggle with, and I have my reasons why. And generally, what this video is going to be is a guide on how to actually get bigger arms. So I'm going to go over like fundamentals, mindset tricks, other useful methods that you don't have to do, but you might need to start implementing if you're not seeing any progress. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So the first thing I want to say is that I want you guys to watch this whole video. I'm going to be going into basically more in-depth kind of uncommon things that most of us just haven't heard the longer the video goes on. I'm going to start off with more fundamental stuff. That's going to be super helpful for everybody, but beginners in general. After that, I'm slowly going to get more into some of my methods to grow my arms and some other like mindset tricks and programming tricks that you guys can actually implement to finally make the change. And I'll go over into why some of the stuff that a lot of people do just doesn't work and why you've probably been struggling to grow your arms and how to actually make that change to grow your arms and how to structure everything. So every piece of this is going to be crucial, and some of these pieces are at the end. So learning the tips I'm going to share with you are important, but implementing them is the only way to get real results. My advice is useless if you don't actually use it. So you can't just like watch my video and expect to grow your arms. You actually have to put the time and effort in to implement it. I'd be happy to coach any of you guys. I do a little bit of coaching on the side, kind of off and on, if anybody's interested. My email is on the about section of my channel. But with that being said, take the time to actually understand and implement this advice that I'm about to give. So I have divided this video into 3 different sections. So the first one's going to be top priorities. That's stuff that's pretty much necessary. Next portion is going to be the useful methods. So stuff that can be useful, but I wouldn't say it's necessary. It's just stuff that you can add or maybe put some thought into. The last portion of this is going to be mindset tricks on how to actually maybe put it in your program properly, the right approach to come to this training with, and how to actually enjoy your training a little bit more. Question from my buddy Carell from Stand Strength. I will be answering that today in this video. So let's start this one off in the top priority section, starting off with the fundamentals. First one I'm going to go into is going to be frequency. So the frequency should be high. It's about 2 or 3 times a week for what I'd recommend for arm training. There's no downsides to high frequency with arm training. So if we define 2 to 3 times a week as high frequency for this video, that's pretty much optimal for arm training. The reason being is because, yeah, you can still get pretty similar results between 1 time a week and 3 times a week if volume's equated, but there's basically no recovery issues when it comes to arm training in the first place, so why not split it up a little bit? For another bigger muscle that requires a lot more compound movements, that's where the recovery gets a little bit tricky depending on where you're at, but splitting up the arm movements, because they're isolations, they're super easy to recover from. They don't really affect any other lifts with that recovery aspect. I'd recommend higher frequency. It's just kind of playing it on the safe side. You'll get better at the movements and you can have a little bit more variation too. So that's 100% what I'd recommend. Once a week isn't the end of the world, but 2 to 3 times a week is definitely going to be the sweet spot. Next fundamental is volume. So your volume should be high. And this is going to sound a little bit crazy, but if you followed a little bit of the new science and some of the new meta-analysis, I'm going to recommend, and I don't recommend everybody to start this off, so watch this whole video, 15 to 30 sets per week for biceps and then same for triceps. If you're not close to it, slowly work your way up to it in a progressive overload with volume. For forearms, you can just start by doing any direct work, since most people skip it entirely. I'm sure like 90% of the people watching this, I just called them out. It's okay, I'm in the same boat. I just started training forearms like 5 or 6 months ago. And unfortunately, I'm playing catch up. So for forearms, any direct work is good. 6 to 10 sets a week of some type of wrist flexion on top of some type of wrist extension would be awesome. You don't necessarily need to do just like a wrist extension isolation. I find that reverse curls or a reverse curl variation is always going to be better. That's definitely what I'd recommend. Start with 6 to 10 sets if you have never done this or have done it very inconsistently, like 90% of you probably have, myself included. So Next fundamental, as you can tell if you're probably catching on, these are my 4 fundamentals to hypertrophy that I always preach about. Next one's going to be proximity to failure. You have to experiment with this for yourself. So in general, you can gain pretty similar amounts of muscle training with 0 to 2 reps in reserve. That being said, you are the judge of your proximity to failure. So if you're 5 reps from failure and it starts to hurt and you think you're 1 rep from failure, that's not true and that's incorrect. So you have to be pretty good at judging it. It isn't very dangerous to take a lot of arm movements to failure. So there's not a whole ton of downside. There's no like, it's very low injury risk. Most of lifting is anyways, but the fatigue isn't going to catch up to you from taking an arm set to failure. Like if you're doing bicep curls to failure on a barbell, like not going to fatigue you a whole ton. So it's up to you. I would say the results are probably going to be pretty similar either way, but I would recommend training closer to that 1 rep shy of failure, 0 reps shy of failure even, because it's playing it on the safe side, because we tend to judge pretty bad, especially the newer we are to lifting. So I would definitely recommend get better at judging, just take some practice. Don't freak out about it, but get used to taking a few sets to failure to really know what it feels like. The more frequently you do it, the more accurate you are with every guess. So last one, as most of you could have predicted, is going to be exercise selection. And this one I'm just going to give you a little bit of guidance with, because there's 1,000 different variations of every lift. The top priority within exercise selection is that you have at least one movement that you're doing about 2 or 3 times a week that has a weighted stretch. So for the biceps, that's going to be some type of incline curl where you're leaning back and getting a stretch on your biceps. Really any lift where your arm is basically behind you. So you can do like a cable curl with your arm behind you. A drag curl probably wouldn't be the best, but I know that's what a lot of you are thinking, but some type of incline curl, some type of incline cable curl where your arm's behind you, definitely pretty necessary. And for the triceps, that's really just going to be any overhead work. It's up to you to decide if you want to do it with a dumbbell, with an easy bar, with a cable. It doesn't really matter as long as it's good for you. You just have to find what your mobility allows for, what your own biomechanics allow for, and take it from there. So I'm not going to tell you what lifts to do. I'm going to tell you what type of lift you need, and you can select from there. Next portion for the exercise selection is going to be the opposite. So instead of a stretch position, it's going to be a contracted position. So when I say contracted position, it's going to be a shortened position of your muscles. So to put it in the simplest terms I possibly can, if this is stretching my bicep, this is shortening my bicep. So if I had, let's say, an incline dumbbell curl where I'm leaning back and curling up like this with my elbow behind me, and also in my program I had, say, a spider curl where I'm up like this and my arms are forwards, that's a little bit of both. So the reason why I recommend getting some type of shortened position movement isn't because that builds more muscle, because it actually doesn't. It's the weighted stretch that builds most of the muscle. But the benefit to this is obviously you're still building muscle. It might not be quite as much, but it's still a great movement in the shortened position for the most part. And you get an incredible mind-muscle connection. And one, that's just fun to feel your arms actually contract and feel like they're working. And 2, it can actually help you feel what's going on in other movements. And I hate people that like kind of shit on mind muscle connection and say it's not important. It's like, yeah, obviously it's not going to build you more muscle. Like if you squeeze your quads on a squat, you're not going to build more muscle than someone that just squats heavy for sets of 10. But over the long run, it can help you out on isolation movements, and it just gets you feeling the right muscles to be working, which is difficult for a lot of muscles, especially the ones you can't see. So I do have a pretty soft spot for mind muscle connection. I do think it's pretty important. I definitely recommend using it. Next portion I have here is that under the top priority portion, technique is more important than progressive overload, but still track your lifts. So what I'm saying here is don't just focus on progressive overload. I've talked about my stance on this in so many videos in the past. I'm not going to beat a dead horse at this point. But by the way, if you haven't seen those videos, I would recommend watching them before just taking what I say right now as pure advice, because my view on progressive overload is pretty nuanced and it's a little bit different. I still think it's important, but I just don't think it should be a focus. So if you don't understand what my view is on that and how I view it, I would probably check my older videos. But to get back to my point, kind of get off this tangent, what I'm saying is improving your technique and getting better at an actual lift itself is actually a form of progressive overload, because let's say you're doing barbell curls with just the 45-pound bar for sets of 10. Every time you do it, you're going to get a little bit better at it. And eventually you'll get to a point where 10 is no longer challenging, so you have to do 11 or 12, and that's fine. That's the way I want you guys to be overloading these movements. If you just focus on adding weight every week, like the 5x5 program, it doesn't necessarily work out because these movements are loaded very, very light, and you can't just add 5 pounds forever because it's a very big percentage of most arm lifts. So getting the best you can at these lifts and allowing the progressive overload to happen is crucial. Reps with the system we're going to be using, they come automatically. The progressive overload does happen automatically. When it comes to adding weight, it's up to you to set your goal of when the weight needs to be added. The weight isn't just going to add itself. You have to be the judge of when it needs to be added, and I'll go over the system we're going to be using here. So that leads me right into my next point. So the system that I want you guys to try and use is going to be the rep goal system from Steve Shaw. It's incredible. I've been using it for about, I want to say, 8 to 12 months at this point, and it is really good for bodybuilding. It's really good for isolation movements too, because it doesn't have like a linear weight progression. It's a slow and steady, basically, progression within the reps instead. And then once the reps get to a certain point, aka the rep goal, then you add some weight. So an example of this would be if you're doing, let's say, barbell curls, and you want to shoot for 75 pounds for 30 total reps across 3 sets. Let's say you start off and you can get 24 across 3 sets. Say you get 10, 8, then 6. You slowly work up until you get 30 across all 3 sets, and then you add the weight. And then let's say you go from 75 pounds up to 85 pounds, and then you hit 30 reps total again a few months later. That's a good form of progressive overload for the arms. And keep in mind, it's not going to be linear. You're going to have days that fluctuate, that go up and down, and that's totally fine, but track your lifts so you can see the long-term progression. I've said this before, it looks like a healthy stock where if you're going up a little bit, maybe 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, over the long run, that makes a huge difference, and just don't get caught up in that day-to-day progression. It really doesn't mean a whole ton. Focus on the long term, zoom out a little bit, and you'll see. Check the 6-month progression. If you're in the same spot, one of your fundamentals is wrong. If you're progressing over time, you're building muscle and your arms are probably bigger. So next portion I have here is going to be doing direct forearm work. So wrist flexion and extension and reverse curls. I know I mentioned this earlier, but this is going to be super important. You can't just have a huge upper arm with like stick forearms, and I'll get into my point on why this works right here. So don't just rely on compound movements or isometrics for forearms. This can be good for strength, but it isn't the best for size. Instead, find a wrist curl and extension variation that feels best for you and something that you enjoy doing. So a lot of people say like, oh, deadlifts will grow your forearms, or like barbell rows or pull-ups will grow your forearms. And that's true to an extent. It's not going to not grow your forearms, but we have to keep in mind that for the most part, that's an isometric movement. So yeah, it's going to work your grip strength and you'll get some noob gains off of that for sure. But at some point, you actually have to get a full stretch and a full, basically, flexion and extension of your actual forearm to grow it the best we can. Like, I don't see why people think that just an isometric is perfect for your forearms. And yeah, an isometric for your forearms will grow your forearms more than an isometric for your chest would grow your chest, because that's just basic anatomy of what your forearms are actually used for. But at the same time, if I was to tell you, like, treat every other muscle like most lifters treat their forearms, we'd be doing isometrics all day and we'd all be small. So why do you think so many lifters have like a huge set of legs, huge chest, huge back, and their forearms look like they've never even lifted before? It's because they don't isolate them. So isolate your forearms, find a couple lifts you like. If you've never done them, do do total sets of 6 to 10 per week on flexion and extension. If you are doing it, just slowly overload with the volume and you should be good. And you can just do these with your arm days. I recommend doing them You can pair them in with biceps. I usually go from biceps, kind of transfer over to like reverse curls as one of my last like bicep forearm movements, and then go into a little bit more forearm direct work. So that is the completion of the top priorities section. Part 2 is going to be the useful methods. And these are just a few different methods, nothing too crazy, but a few other perspectives and a few other methods of attack that you can come at some of these lifts with. The first one I have here is going to be experimenting with your grip and experimenting with your range of motion and trying out new cable attachments. Like a lot of people will do curls, let's say curls with like a fat barbell or with fat grips. And that's not necessarily optimal. I'll probably have a video on that at some point in the future, but if you're trying to grow your arms, it's actually a little bit better to have like a smaller grip. So a lot of easy bars have a smaller grip. A lot of cable attachments you can find that have a pretty small grip on them. What that's going to do is kind of deactivate your forearms a little bit, basically take them out of the motion a little bit and make it a little bit more direct towards your biceps. If you were just to curl, like, let's say you're grabbing like a log and you're carrying the outside of a log and you curl that up, that's going to be a ton of forearms. And then if you have, let's say you're curling like a band and you're just holding like the edge of a tiny little like monster band or something, that's going to be pretty much all bicep. It doesn't take much effort from your forearm to hold something that's so small. So generally the smaller the bar, the better. I know some people can run into certain like overuse and elbow injuries with this stuff. So it's up to you to decide what's best for you. All I'm going to say is I've been doing this for a long time at this point. I've never had any issues with it. I also train every muscle in basically every way possible, so it makes sense that I've never had an injury or any issues with this stuff. But I find that for bicep and for tricep training, the smaller the grip, the better to a certain extent. Just like your standard like easy bar circumference is probably best. I don't like training with like the dumbbells with a full-on barbell size grip. Definitely not the best. Like, yeah, you feel it in your forearms more, but your forearms don't grow from doing bicep curls, they grow from doing forearm work. So next point I have here is going to be the cable attachments that I just mentioned. So the same thing kind of goes here. Find the best cable attachments for you. Like tricep pushdowns is just a straight bar. That's not the best way to do it. There's other ways, and it's up to you to kind of experiment what's best for you. I'm not going to list these off because this video would turn into like an hour long, which it might anyways, but find which cable attachments are best. Do a little bit of research. Look up like some biomechanics and that kind of stuff. Look up what are the best lifters doing? What are the smartest lifters using for their grips on the cable? And these are like little details that we don't think about a whole ton. And if you're not getting results, fixing a lot of these little details make a pretty big difference, and they kind of compound over time, and they make you enjoy your training a little bit more, and they make you want to get bigger arms once you start to see a little bit of results too. So next point I have here is, this is generally more for like the kind of intermediate and advanced lifters. I know I don't like those terms, but I don't know what else to use. So once you're a little bit stronger, higher reps can be super useful. Some lifts put you in a very awkward position if you have strong arms already. Like my triceps got to a point where I actually had a pretty tough time doing tricep pushdowns because my abs would literally give out because basically the tricep bar's weight was pulling me up. So find certain variations or use higher reps, because I used to try and lift heavy and do like sets of 8 to 12 on tricep pushdowns, but now I do like sets of 15 to 20 and I get the same exact growth, but the weight's light enough to where my core doesn't necessarily give out, and I don't have to use like an awkward split stance and internal rotation on my shoulders just to keep the weight down. So higher reps can be a lot better for that. Go a little bit slower, get more out of less weight. This goes for a lot of isolation lifts too, like with a bar. Let's say you're doing a barbell curl. When you have 135 pounds, I know most people don't curl that, but let's say you get to a point where you're curling 100 or 130 pounds, you have a 130-pound barbell in front of you, like a foot and a half from your forearm. That takes a lot of basically kind of balance and strength to prevent that bar from pulling you forward. So what you'll do a lot of the time is lean back or pull your elbows back like this to keep the weight centered over your feet, but that can impact your technique. So maybe instead of doing like sets of 5, try sets of like 15 or 20. It makes a lot more sense in my mind. Last point I have here under the useful methods is going to be, just going to put it simple, get a pump, have fun. Getting a pump's awesome. It's not going to hurt you, especially with arm training. It's enjoyable. It's fun. If anything, it's going to help you. So I'm not going to speak too much on that. Just get a pump, have some fun. Even if you just take one of your arm days to focus a little bit more on the pump, just do it. It's fun. Like, you'll actually enjoy your workout a little bit more. That's the extent I'm going to go on there. So last portion. This one's going to be important for so many of the people that have like a powerlifting focus or like a power building focus. This is going to be the mindset tricks portion. So the first one I have here is going to be to set new goals. If your goals are still to build the heaviest squat, bench, deadlift, and overhead press you can, your focus isn't actually on getting bigger arms. You have to reallocate your focus to something else to improve it. It's impossible to just focus on 5 different things at once and expect great results on everything. So set new goals. Strive for better stretches and contractions in mind-muscle connection. Arms are a great muscle to track with measurement, so set a goal of arm measurement rather than strength output. And you'll notice the goal that you set for yourself immediately becomes your highest priority, and programming follows that. Your mindset follows that. So set goals to have big arms. If your arms are 15 inches, shoot for 16 inches in a year. Same thing if you're at 16 and a half inches plateaued, like shoot for the 17-inch arms. Like set your goals as that. Like just hitting a arbitrary 350 bench doesn't really guarantee you much. So experiment with the measurements. Actually track your progress. Take your measurements. What works when you made a little bit of growth? Like you'll start to realize a little bit more, and you'll know what works for you and what doesn't. So that's my spiel for that. So next portion here, next point I've got is prioritize your arms for once. And I don't just mean focusing on them harder during your workouts. I mean actually having your program reflect your priorities. Your arm volume and frequency should reflect your priorities. Compound lifts don't count as arm volume in my opinion. Most lifters aren't arm dominant. Lots of the influencers that you watch basically the ones that have great arms, they also have great genetics. This doesn't mean you can't get to their arm size. It just means you'll need to use different methods and isolate more. Past the beginner phase, very few lifters grow their arms from compound lifts. You need to isolate them to keep growing. This doesn't apply to everybody, but it does to most people. So recognizing that we will have to train our arms harder and with more volume is the first step to prioritizing them. So a lot of the influencers, and this is just like some real talk here, a lot of these guys that you see, they have great genetics. And I'm not somebody to use genetics as an excuse. My stance on this is that you just have to try different things, and you probably have to work a little bit harder. A lot of these people are either arm dominant or just respond to anything, so they can grow their arms from chin-ups, dips, and close grip bench. That doesn't work for most people. It might when you first start lifting because you respond to anything, but you'll get to a point where you start to realize that you're not arm dominant and you don't have elite genetics. Like somebody like myself, I took this brain dead advice that I should just do compounds to grow my arms, and my arms were my smallest muscle group. And I got into the gym to like mostly get bigger arms, which is just frustrating. Obviously, I'm not like actually that upset about it, but I just want to make sure you guys don't fall into that same trap that I fell into. So these guys that you see are generally genetically elite. So does that mean we can't get to the same amount of muscle mass that they are at? Not necessarily, but we just have to try new methods. We have to experiment. Maybe any type of resistance training works for them, and only a select rep range or type of volume will work for you. You just have to experiment. You just have to find what's best for you. Next point I've got here is to add an actual arm day to your program. This is difficult for a lot of lifters to do. It will be hard to drop your ego and your attachment to compound lifts at the start of every workout. If arms are truly a priority for you, you need arm days. You can't just say arms are priority for me and then follow a push-pull legs or a full body split. It just doesn't work that way. So what you need to do is get an actual arm day. If you find that you're having a hard time prioritizing an arm day and actually creating one in your program, you probably have an attachment to compound movements, and you probably have an attachment to needing to hit a certain strength number at the start of your workout to actually feel good about yourself and have a good workout. And I understand that mindset because I've been there. And compound movements are great, and we all need them in our program to get optimal results. But with that being said, when you're doing an arm day, you're not going to be doing compound movements. You're going to be doing those on your other days, whether you're hitting chest or back or like an upper day or a lower day. That's the time to hit your compound movements. You're not going to be doing them on your arm day. It just doesn't make sense for most programs. So get an arm day, get used to the idea of coming in and not hitting a 1 rep max or hitting a 5 rep max or adding 5 pounds to some heavy compound lift. It's okay to go to the gym and just bang out some arm workouts. Like, that's fine. That's a good thing. If your goal is set to get bigger arms, it will happen from these arm days. You don't have to like get crazy strong on some compound lift every single time you're in the gym. Yes, there's a time and a place for it, and you should be doing compound lifts in your program, but they don't have to be every day, especially on your arm days. It just doesn't make sense. And I hope this resonates with a lot of people, because this is what held me back from actually getting an arm day for so long, because I was so attached to just getting strong and getting that big, heavy compound lift right at the start of the workout, literally every time I was in the gym. So it's okay. You have my permission. You have my validation to do an arm day twice a week. You have 5 other days in the week to do compound lifts. It's fine to just go to the gym to do arms, and it's fine to take those lifts as seriously as you do your compound lifts. Not only is it fine, you should be taking them just as seriously, because isolation lifts will build your arms just as much as compound lifts will build your quads or your chest. So this is important. Just because the lift is lighter or not as like big and extravagant doesn't mean it's not as important. It just applies to a different muscle. So mini rant there. Let me get back on track. Last point I've got here is learn to put other goals on the back burner. And this is absolutely key to focusing on one area at a time. Absolutely key. So learn to put your other goals on the back burner. A lot of us have multiple goals, so figuring out which ones to attack at once just makes the most sense. Put other muscle groups on maintenance. You can maintain lots of your muscle with pretty low volume. In worst case, if you lose any, you can gain it back very quickly. Same goes for strength, by the way, for those of you that like to build strength. Decreasing volume will be a great way to maintain any other muscle groups. It's very difficult to focus on multiple goals at once, so put your strength goals or other muscle group goals on maintenance for a bit and resume once your arms are where they need to be. So this doesn't just apply to arm training or bodybuilding or strength training or powerlifting. What I'm talking about here is the ability to maintain a goal that you've already hit in order to achieve another goal that you've set. So if you've built a good base and you have an overall well-rounded physique, but you want to work on a couple other spots, maintain the muscle that you have. It doesn't take a whole ton of volume. Generally, like 5 to 8 sets per week of something will maintain what you have pretty quickly. Let's say for myself, my chest and my back are exactly where I want them to be. I'm going to do a chest back day like maybe once. It's about 1.5 times a week. I am doing a little bit of an experiment right now, so I'm not going to give all the details, but it's pretty low volume, pretty low frequency, but it's enough to maintain what I've built up. And decreasing my volume from that and decreasing my frequency on those muscles allows me to take that effort and that energy and apply it into my arm training again. So I'm going to keep it at that today. I'm going to try and keep this video under 30 minutes, but I hope you guys liked that video. I hope a lot of it resonated with you. And yeah, just if you have any questions, let me know per usual. So thanks for watching.